And it sounds like there's a great interest from most of you on learning more about this. So I thought I'd put together a quick presentation. And I didn't include just sugar alcohols. I also looked at artificial sweeteners and natural sweeteners, since those are things that we use. And I've also gotten some questions on that. So sugar alcohols. So the name actually is a misnomer. It's not sugar and it's not alcohol. They are naturally occurring in some fruits and vegetables, less sweet than sugar. So you may need to use a little bit more. They have a small amount of calories, which I think some people thought they had none, but they are partially absorbed. It will depend on the form of the sugar alcohol. And because they are partially absorbed, they do have a small impact on blood sugar. They are part of the FODMAP group. And FODMAP is fermentable oligo monosaccharides and polyols. So polyols are sugar alcohols. If you've ever had GI issues, if you've been diagnosed with IBS, you likely know about FODMAPs because they are problematic for people to digest. And athletes can have problems with FODMAPs leading up to GI distress and races. So then we've got the artificial sweeteners. So the 4 that are approved by the FDA are aspartame, acesulfame potassium, sucralose, and neotame. They are made in a lab, but sucralose is made from sugar. And I do remember when Splenda first came on the market, it was coded as it's so natural, it's just like sugar. These are much sweeter than sugar, so you do need to use less if you're using them in a recipe. It does not raise blood sugar, but it does affect your insulin. And so that can cause reactive hypoglycemia. So for instance, say you're having a Diet Coke with one of these artificial sweeteners and you're doing it in between meals, so you have little glucose in your bloodstream. What will happen is you have this, you'll raise your insulin, and then that will cause the sugar that you have in your bloodstream to go into your cells, and then you end up with low blood sugar. So that's where this can actually cause cravings. And that's where they've shown that these actually cause weight gain, not weight loss. They also have a detrimental effect on the levels of good bacteria in the GI tract. The other thing interesting, I wouldn't cook with these because they generate toxic compounds when exposed to heat. That's really all the more I'm going to say about the artificial sweeteners because I'm not a fan of them. So then there's natural sweeteners, stevia, monk fruit, honey, syrup. So some do have a blood sugar response. Honey and syrup do. They are more sweet than sugar generally, but it's going to vary. And then some have no blood sugar impact and some do. And some actually have nutritional benefits. So these are a lot of times a good replacement for sugar. So let's look at the glycemic index. So the glycemic index is how does this affect the blood sugar when you eat it? So at the top of these sugars, you have sucrose, but surprisingly, white bread is way up above even sucrose. So that stuff is like, I remember one time my son had a pretzel bun from Costco. Woo, he was flying high. He was, I don't know, I think he was 4. I'm like, okay, those are not on the list to be bought anymore because they're just pure white dough. So you've got sugar, another thing, so you've got blackstrap molasses. I didn't list that here, but that is actually one of my favorite things to add to salad dressings. And it is actually a rich source of calcium, iron, magnesium. So it's really beneficial. Maple syrup is going to be next down the list, then honey, then coconut sugar. And that's where you'll see, and coconut sugar is quite a bit lower here. That's where you'll see coconut sugar as listed as a healthier option to sugar. Then you've got maltitol, a sugar alcohol. So this is one that's going to have a higher blood sugar response. You've got agave next as we kind of drop down quite a bit. Now, agave is like high fructose corn syrup. It's a lot of fructose in it. And the popularity of fructose sweeteners started with because they don't actually impact blood sugar because it's not glucose. But the problem is they have to be processed by the liver. And if you're having a lot of it, that's a lot of work for the liver. It can actually get deposited as fat in the liver. And so that's where we see this increase in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and actually in children, which we had never seen before. And that's coming from the high fructose corn syrup in the sodas. So I am not a big fan of agave. If you go out to eat and they have a skinny margarita, they love to put agave in it. That's fine. That's not a lot. That's not going to be a big deal. And it's better than having like a super sugary margarita mixer. So I wouldn't worry about that, but I wouldn't use it on a regular basis. Then you've got xylitol. So xylitol is usually in chewing gum. Then we work our way down. Erythritol has no blood sugar impact. Stevia, monk fruit, or lohan guo, and sucralose spenda. So those are going to be the ones that have no blood sugar impact. Okay, so, and then the sweeteners with the beneficial nutrients, blackstrap molasses, I already talked about, the maple syrup, honey, coconut sugar. So they actually have some good nutrients in them. Okay, so sugar alcohols. So erythritol, which is the most popular one right now, that's used in a lot of the keto things. It has the smallest molecular weight. It's most popular because it mixes well with other things and it really has no aftertaste. It mostly is not absorbed in the GI tract, so it does have minimal blood sugar impact, and it's also not metabolized in the GI tract, so it has less GI issues. It's not fermented by that GI bacteria, and it's actually excreted in the urine. And an interesting thing too is if it's a free radical scavenger, so it can actually increase or reduce your free radicals or reactive oxygen species. And then, but it can increase malabsorption of fructose. And I see this with athletes where they think they have an issue maybe with SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or IBS, and we check and it's actually fructose that is the issue. And fructose is used in a lot of sports nutrition products because you can increase the uptake by using different transporters between fructose and glucose. But if fructose is a problem, you need to work with sports nutrition products that don't have fructose. And so I have a whole, for the athletes I work with, I have a whole list of the products and we kind of go through that. So malitol is used in candies, gum, ice cream, baked goods. It can help with respiratory issues, which is kind of surprising, but in large doses, it can cause GI distress because it is somewhat digested by those by the bacteria. Sorbitol is made from corn syrup. So, not a fan of that, but it's in gum and candies. It actually surprisingly has the most calories. So it appears to be the most absorbed. Also can cause GI distress. Xylitol is called wood sugar. It's found in straw cereals and some fruit and veg. It's used a lot in chewing gum. It does have some positive benefits for tooth health and breath. And it actually can improve glucose uptake. And we don't want glucose sitting in our bloodstream. We want it uptake into the cells. And so this can actually help a little bit with that. But it can cause diarrhea and GI pain from the parts that when it hits those, the GI bacteria. Isomalt is used in hard candies and cough drops, also can lead to GI distress. And mannitol is used in a lot of chocolate coatings and ice creams. It's poorly absorbed by the kidneys, so it can be a diuretic, causing you to urinate more. And I guess if you were taking a lot of it, I would have a concern about kidney issues. So for those with GI distress, 20 grams per day appears to be the threshold. But I will tell you, if you have an overgrowth of good or bad bacteria, these are going to feed it. What's not absorbed is going to feed that bacteria. And so you could get GI distress from this, even if you are taking in less than 20 grams per day, if you have an overgrowth of good or bad bacteria. So that's where really need to be careful with those. Okay, so the natural sweetener. So stevia is sweeter than sugar. There is a genetic mutation associated with bitter flavor. My son, I think, has it because he, like even the protein powder that we're using now has some stevia in it, and he doesn't like it. He can't eat it, and so, which is a bummer to me. It can improve insulin sensitivity, and again, we want our cells sensitive to insulin because insulin is kind of what opens the cells. It's like knocks on the door, the cells open and the glucose comes out. We don't want our glucose in our bloodstream. So we want our cells sensitive to insulin. So this is a good thing. It has been shown to reduce liver enzymes and help with kidney health. I like to use only the drops, unless you're traveling or you're in a coffee shop or something, because the processing to create it into a powder can add some harmful chemicals. So monk fruit or lohan guo, that's sweeter than sugar. It's used in traditional Chinese medicine to relieve sore throats and reduce phlegm. It may be anti-inflammatory. There are some studies on that, but not a lot. It's difficult to grow, so it can be more expensive, and it can, for some, have some aftertaste. There is a product that Costco sells that I like. It's Lakanto monk fruit sweetener. It does have some erythritol in it. So you can use those. I find it to be very sweet. I just use a tiny amount of it. Honey. That is also sweeter than sugar, and it does not have the same metabolic effects as sugar, though. So it's a more positive thing for diabetics, those working on weight issues and things like that. It's antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, and it's an antioxidant. So it's really beneficial for us. It can help with respiratory issues and cough, and it's actually easier to digest unless you have fructose malabsorption, because there is some fructose in it. So maple sugar is also slightly sweeter than sugar. It's full of antioxidants as well, and it reduces inflammation. It's rich in zinc and manganese. So these have some really good nutrients in them. If you're going to replace honey, replace sugar with honey or maple syrup in a recipe, some will say you can just substitute equal amounts, but I like to do a little bit less. And you're also going to have to reduce some of the other liquids in the recipe, or maybe add a little bit more of a gluten-free flour or something to kind of help, because otherwise it's going to be there's too much liquid. Another thing I forgot to mention, but monk fruit, there have been studies that it shows that it has a positive effect on cancer and diabetic gene expression, which I think is interesting. Okay, so the pros and cons of sugar alcohol, because that's where this all came up, right? So, so the benefits: it has a low blood sugar impact. It's good for oral health. It helps with the gut bacteria in the mouth. And actually, they're finding like people that have more health issues, a lot of it's tied up to the bacteria in the mouth. It's a prebiotic. So a prebiotic is different from a probiotic. So a probiotic is the actual positive bacteria. You're taking it in a capsule or drinking it to try and put that into your gut. It doesn't actually colonize, though. It passes through and it has some positive benefits on your bacterial terrain. But what actually feeds the bacteria and helps it to grow there is a prebiotic. And so prebiotics are a lot of fiber. So that's where the resistant starch I talked about in the green bananas, the sweet potatoes, that is a prebiotic. But the thing is, it feeds the bacteria. So if you have good bacteria in the wrong place, this is going to not make you feel so great. Then the bacteria will ferment the prebiotic fiber and it will cause gas and bloating. And that's where I use it to test, because some probiotic formulas have prebiotics in them. Some smoothies and protein powders have prebiotics in them. And so if I find a client, inulin's a big one. If I find a client that is getting gas and bloating from that, then I'm going to investigate a little bit more about what's going on in the gut. It also, in animal studies, it did actually increase bone density. So the concerns. So there are GI issues, particularly with the maltol, isomalt, sorbitol. It's dose dependent. One other thing I found, so one stick of gum has 2 grams of xylitol. So maybe an issue, may not be an issue, depending on how much gum you chew and depending on your how much bacteria you have in your blood, in your GI tract. It will still raise the blood sugar, so diabetics should be careful of the dose. And it can lead to overeating. So, and this is true really with any of these low calorie or non-calorie sweeteners, because the sweetness can lead to more craving. So you really have to be mindful of that. So if I have a client that comes to me and they have a lot of sugar cravings, we're going to just get rid of it all for a while to help with those cravings. And if you believe it to be good, you may eat more. So that's my feedback on that. And I would love it if you guys have any comments. And if you have any more questions, please post it in the Facebook group. Thanks.